Sam Altman said that he wanted to fund 10x more startups year after year until he funded all of the startups in the world. That drive to want to empire build, to want to be the dominant force that actually gets to shape this technology and therefore the future of society was ever present and a guiding North Star.
Why are we creating something that replaces human beings?
These companies want efficiencies now, and they're making a future bet that they won't have to have these human employees anymore. That's creating a desperate base of workers who then have no full-time employment opportunities to turn to.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today is an author, journalist, and founder of the AI Resist List, which, as the name suggests, is helping people resist the mythology and impact of artificial intelligence on our lives to stop its potential abuse of power. Karen Hao has spent years uncovering how the race to build advanced AI is reshaping labor, democracy, and inequality. She's not anti-AI, but believes there is a better way. Her book, Empire of AI, looks in depth at the people controlling the AI companies and what their real motivations might be. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if you could change the world, and you are clearly trying to, how would you change it?
And I just ultimately want everyone to be able to have a dignified life, have access to good economic opportunity, good healthcare, good education. And part of the reason why I'm so focused on the topic of AI right now is because the way that it's going is undermining that.
But they say precisely the opposite, don't they? The AI giants all tell us how AI is revolutionizing our lives, is going to be wonderful for education, is going to liberate us from the drudgery of mundane tasks, and help our future.
I mean, one of the challenges of talking about AI is that it refers to a really broad collection of technologies. So there's certain types of AI systems that, yes, could help with healthcare, that can help with education, that can help with the things that these tech giants often talk about. But the problem is they are investing in a version of AI that actually does the opposite. I sometimes say that AI is like the word transportation, and they are selling the benefits of bicycles while building rockets.
Now, you have been on quite a journey. I mean, because you started out kind of wanting to work in that world.
Yes, I went to MIT for undergrad and I studied engineering. And then I moved to San Francisco after graduation to join a startup within Silicon Valley. At the time, AI wasn't really a thing. So I wasn't working in AI per se, but I was part of that world. And the reason I ended up becoming a journalist is because very quickly I realized that Silicon Valley's model of innovation is built around creating profitable technologies, and the types of technologies that society needs to do all the things that these tech giants promise is not, in fact, actually profitable. And so this ecosystem is not geared towards the right kinds of technologies. And I wanted to write about that and challenge that, critique that, and hope that we can figure out new models of innovation.
And I suppose that it's the story of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Sam Altman that is at the core of your book. And I suppose the argument that what they started out talking about many years ago is a long, long way from where they ended up.
It's funny because I started covering AI in 2018. I had the privilege of really learning about this technology before the information environment about it became really chaotic and it became hard to find high quality reality. And I started reporting on OpenAI in 2019. And at that time, I did think that it was a very different organization. They were nonprofit. They said that they were mission driven, and they wanted to create an organization that would dominate. They wanted to dominate the technology and to build a monopoly that would allow them to accrue an enormous amount of resources. And at the time, having a nonprofit and tucking it into that mission-driven facade was the best way of going about it. And then once they were able to get the talent that they needed and get public buy-in, policymaker buy-in, that's when they started pursuing a more capitalistic for-profit endeavor. I mean,
seeds of corruption is quite a claim that you would need to substantiate, I suppose, and they would deny. But I mean, didn't it start out with them all saying, we are warning about the dangers of AI. That's why we're doing it this way. AI needs to be good for humanity. And that's what this court case that Musk has just lost on a technicality, I suppose, rather than the core of the argument, was about.
They did say that. And it's not that they didn't believe that, but also in all the internal emails that they were exchanging with each other, which I talk about in the book, that came out in the course of this lawsuit, this very lawsuit, they also referenced this idea that they needed to beat Google because Google was the only game in town when it came to AI development.
And Google was being portrayed as the evil empire.
And exactly. And so you can see this intertwining of both a desire to change the world and to do something that's beneficial for society, as well as to be number one. So there was this fusion of ego along with this ideological push to do something that they felt would be right by the world. But you can see from the trajectory of OpenAI's history that the ego and this desire to be number one, to dominate, to build a monopoly, always begins to supersede what is ultimately actually bringing benefit to society.
I mean, how could they have ever sought to build a monopoly?
How could they have sought to? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you think that was their intention, I mean, was it ever realistic to think that you could have a monopoly on a technology like AI?
I mean, I think it's a very Silicon Valley ethos. So before Sam Altman became the CEO of OpenAI, he was the president of Y Combinator, which is a prestigious startup incubator in the Valley. And he said that he wanted to fund 10x more startups year after year until he funded all of the startups in the world. I mean, this idea of just capturing everything under the sun so that it is his and his to own is a concept that is not unique to him and is a feature that you find among all of the Silicon Valley, the main elite and the leaders today. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was also famously like this as well. And when he stepped down from the presidency to then become CEO of OpenAI, he said, my proudest thing about my time at Y Combinator was that I built an empire. And so, is it possible that they actually monopolize this technology? I don't know, but that drive to want to empire build, to want to be the dominant force that actually gets to shape this technology and therefore the future of society was ever present and a guiding North Star for how they organized their research, their strategy, their recruitment efforts, and ultimately their commercialization.
So just explain why you think empire is a good way of framing what AI is doing.
So if we go back to this idea of the transportation analogy, that these companies are ultimately building the rockets of AI. They're incredibly resource-intensive technologies that require an enormous amount of data, land, energy, and water to facilitate its production. And the way that these companies actually go about consolidating an enormous amount of these resources and therefore an enormous amount of economic and political power as they engage on this quest is through the dispossession of people around the world. So, the data that they trained these models on was intellectual property of someone else's that they just took. It was the private data of individuals that they just took and claimed as their own. They use an extraordinary amount of labor in the production of this technology. They also ultimately design these technologies to be labor automating so that it undermines labor rights once it's deployed in the world as well.
What do you mean by labor automating?
They design these to be, quote unquote, everything machines. They say that these are tools that will be able to do anything for anyone. And what essentially that means is they're going after a large swath of knowledge work so that other companies don't hire full-time employees, but rather just buy these products and services from the AI companies. And I recently did a new investigation for More Perfect Union where I was looking at what is happening in the US right now with the impact of AI on the job market. And essentially, we're seeing a vicious cycle happening where the AI industry is pursuing the automation of all this knowledge work. There are a lot of different sectors that are now laying off their workers, not necessarily because AI can immediately do what the workers can do, but these companies want efficiencies now, and they're making a future bet that if they then can invest in AI further, that they won't be able to, they won't have to have these human employees anymore. They can use automation. That's creating a desperate base of workers who then have no full-time employment opportunities to turn to. So what are they turning to? They're actually turning to gig work for the AI industry.
Yeah.
So they're turning to data annotation work, which is the hidden human labor that goes into producing these models. They are doing things like teaching the models the very expertise that they have so that these AI companies can then sell their products as quote unquote PhD level intelligence. And so it's enshittifying all of these knowledge work jobs from full-time, well-compensated positions to these piecemeal gig work, horrific condition types of opportunities.
I mean, I've seen that with my kids' friends. So, I mean, my daughter at university, a lot of her friends have spent their early years at university working on gig work
Yes.
for AIs,
Yes.
training AIs,
Yep.
checking prompts, checking answers. I spoke to my daughter yesterday, actually, and she's in need of work. And I said, well, why don't you do some of that AI work? She said, it's not available anymore because they've now gone to a higher level. So they now don't just want ordinary undergraduates. They want higher level.
They want the PhD graduates, yeah. So
they've already kind of done themselves out of work.
I mean, this is one of the things that, has been happening is that workers are laid off from the full-time, then they're doing this gig work, and then some of them, not all, but some of them then actually automate themselves out of the gig work as well. So this is what I mean by labor automating. This is a choice that the companies make to specifically pursue the automation of knowledge work.
Why is this an empire, though?
The empires of old did the same thing. I mean, when you think of the British East India Company and the British Crown and the interplay between those two, I mean, they also accrued an enormous amount of both profit as well as territorial expansion through the laying claim to resources that were not their own, through enormous amounts of labor exploitation. Also, another parallel, information control. I mean, an important part of maintaining the legitimacy of an empire is by controlling what information is allowed to exist in the world about what the empire is doing. And these companies control the information in multiple ways. They have hired up or they bankroll most of the AI research in the world today. So there's been a huge brain drain from academia to the industry. And they censor and control the fundamental research that is allowed to be published about this technology. If most of the climate scientists in the world were bankrolled by fossil fuel companies, we wouldn't get a clear picture of the climate crisis, and then we wouldn't be able to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable. And in the same way, we have no idea right now the true limitations and capabilities of these technologies, so we don't have the ability to hold these companies accountable. And that's just one layer of information control. Then you talk about the fact that they are ultimately building an information technology and trying to make their chatbots the portal through which everyone engages with the digital universe. And so that is yet a deeper layer of information control that they're trying to establish in society.
You are also very skeptical about the way they are communicating with us, in what they would say is sort of an open and honest way, trying to warn us about the dangers of AI whilst also pointing out the great opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, why have you become so skeptical about it?
So this goes yet another parallel with empire. I mean, religious rhetoric was an essential part of empire building. This idea that we're civilizing people. We are giving heathens an opportunity to believe in God and therefore ascend to heaven. And if we don't do that, they descend to hell. And there is literally a parallel now with the AI world saying, you let us slash and burn through all of these resources to build what they call an artificial general intelligence, which they often conceive of as a machine god. And this machine god, controlled in the right hands within a small group of people that happen to be the Silicon Valley elite, they're going to then be able to usher in a new age of prosperity, abundance, and paradise that sounds exactly like a heavenly state. But if we don't allow them to do that, the evil empire is going to come. It's going to create a machine demon, and humanity is going to descend into hell. And so you can see that this heaven-hell dynamic is an essential part of the myth-making that continues to perpetuate the empire. So every time, let's say Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, comes and says, 40% of jobs could get automated by this technology. First of all, he's always using the passive voice, not saying like, I am building the technology that could do this. Second of all, he's actually just signaling, so our models could do 40% of work, all of the other CEOs of other companies, so please hire our and buy our technology rather than hiring employees. But third of all, there is this idea that it could be even worse if it's not him doing it. And therefore, you should allow him to have this anti-democratic control over this very, very powerful, consequential piece of technology.
I mean, we had Jack Clark on this podcast a few weeks ago, who is Ahmadai's, voice on earth, if you like. And I put to him this skepticism, and he said, look, this is not a marketing opportunity. We are just saying this technology is here. And if we don't do it,
somebody else will. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So why? I mean, why couldn't that be true? Why couldn't it be sincere? Or why don't you think it's sincere?
So this is the thing. I do actually believe that these people believe that.
They are sincere.
They are sincere within their own worldview and their own framework of what they think is right in the world. I mean, this is why they are able to wake up day after day and convincingly talk about these things. They do have to believe that. They are standing on a bedrock of their own belief. But that is, I think, a deeply, the central problem of empire building is that it undermines democracy. They are saying, and they've convinced themselves of a particular narrative that allows them to have paramount control. And they are trying to ultimately take agency away from individuals and communities around the world. When they say, if we don't do it, somebody else will, they're painting this picture of inevitability, that there's nothing you can do about the pace of technological change. There's nothing you can do about the design of this technology. So all of the possible consequences that you see deriving from our actions is the cost that you are going to have to pay.
Isn't that true, though? Because, by the argument of, well, maybe we won't do it, but somebody else will, brackets, the Chinese.
No, because, yeah, right.
That's what they mean.
Right, of course. Yeah, that is what they mean. And interestingly, what we've seen over the last few years is that Chinese companies are now doing open source AI model development. And so they are providing the same technologies, but for free, for cheaper, and therefore now a significant fraction of American technology startups are using Chinese open source models. And so there's this really strange argument that they keep making that, no, you have to allow us to maintain sole control of these technologies. There can be no democratic participation in this because of the possibility that the bad actor is going to do it. And yet, what's actually playing out is the people that they paint as the bad actors are just providing this technology for free, and everyone is using it because it is helpful in what they want to accomplish.
But Anthropic, at least, are arguing we need regulation. And the polls suggest that people are afraid enough of AI to want regulation.
Absolutely.
Is it really possible?
Regulation?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Every industry has at some point had this inflection point where there's regulation that helps shore up the harms within that industry.
I suppose, given how useless politics has been at regulating social media, which isn't anywhere near as powerful, potentially, as artificial intelligence, why do we think we'd have any hope of human politics being able to keep up with artificial intelligence?
Well, first of all, social media and AI are different in that social media was sort of the first wave that happened, and it took people a really long time to establish that social media can be harmful. The AI discourse is happening at a much faster cycle. There was the enormous hype that was like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and within a year, people were starting to realize, wait a minute, there's also all these downstream consequences that we should shore up. And that took a much longer time with social media. The second thing is we do now have plenty of social media regulation. There are countries that are banning certain social media platforms. The EU also just determined that we should now be banning notification apps when it comes to AI. So not only is there social media regulation, there's also AI regulation beginning to happen. There's a lot of local and state level regulation that is happening in the US in particular, where we are seeing communities, because of their concern, because of their broad-based support for governance, pushing their legislators to do something about it. And legislators are, in fact, proposing lots of bills now all across the U.S. There's also many legislative activities that are happening elsewhere around the world, also in the U.K. So there is quite a lot of momentum, and a lot of that momentum is centered on real issues that are trying to shore up those harms.
I mean, the book is based on interviews with people from the industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you had a little bit of access in the early days,
Yeah.
which I guess was pulled quite early on. Just tell us about how that played.
Yeah, so I was at MIT Technology Review as an AI reporter, and I was the first journalist to then profile OpenAI. So I embedded within the company for 3 days in 2019. My profile publishes in 2020. And OpenAI was not happy with the profile because I asked a lot of really tough questions about whether or not the narrative that the organization put out publicly was actually reflective of what was really happening behind closed doors. And they said that they were a nonprofit, that they wouldn't do commercialization, but I found through my reporting at the time that they had already begun commercialization efforts. They were just hiding them from the public, and many other revelations like that. And so the company refused to speak to me for 3 years. And when I then became a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, they started responding to my inquiries again. So I established a little bit of a relationship. And then I left the Journal to embark full-time on writing this book. And they initially said that they would engage and they would allow me to come to the office, embed within the organization. And then Sam Altman was fired and they changed their mind. And so for most of my career as a tech reporter, I have not had front door access. I have had to rely on just sourcing my own interviews. And I think that ended up being a huge strength in my reporting because I was able to get the real stories.
How much concern do you think there is within people who work in AI?
About what in particular?
About all the things that you're raising. I mean, are they talking to you because they're worried themselves?
So it's complicated. People talk to me for different reasons. I think the central shared reason is that people believe that it is important to publicly document what happened in this company because there were many, many consequential decisions that were made sort of on behalf of the public, on behalf of society. People often have different concerns than perhaps the ones that I was presenting in the book. I'm presenting these real-world labor harms, environmental harms, public health crises that are the result of this particular vision of AI that Silicon Valley is pursuing. And some of the people within these companies, or within OpenAI in particular, what they're concerned about is different. It's this idea that AI could develop consciousness, go rogue, and then have detrimental effects. There's no actual scientific backing for this, and they also admit this. They call it a belief, but that was what some people were motivated by. Other people were motivated because of the different concerns that I talk about. Some people were motivated by, the psychological impacts that we're now seeing play out, or just the general recklessness of seeing social media having gone through its move fast and break things phase. They're not quite able to articulate what they think is going to break, but they're worried that something will break based on the speed at which they're operating.
So the effect of these doomsday warnings, on artificial intelligence gaining consciousness, turning on human beings, destroying the world, developing biological weapons, they're actually distracting us from the immediate impact of AI on our lives and our jobs and our environment.
Yes, and it is a very, very useful distraction.
Do you think it's deliberate?
So I often say that the AI world is a little bit like Dune, Frank Herbert's science fiction epic. And the reason is because in Dune, the main character, Paul Atreides, he's on Arrakis. He knows that there's been a myth seeded on Arrakis to paint him as the coming of the Messiah. And he steps into the myth, knowing that it's a myth, in order to leverage it to control the people. But then he spends every single day embodying this myth. He's breathing it and living it and acting it out to the point that he kind of begins to get confused and he starts to think, maybe I am the Messiah. Maybe this actually is true. And it started off as a narrative that is now just reality. And I think there are a lot of people in this world who exist in this kind of blurred state where they understand that this is a narrative that's highly useful and they kind of believe it. and some of them fervently believe it, so they are able to leverage it in these rhetorical and political ways while feeling good about the fact that they are in fact saying something that's aligned with their internal story.
So have you become an activist now, really, with the resist list? What is it?
I would say that my work is still very much journalistic. It's very grounded in the facts. I am reporting all around the world about various different things. And when there are such severe threats to democracy, you need to be able to point that out and call it out rather than just claiming neutrality as a journalist and letting it all unravel. One of the central tenets of democracy is that people believe they have an ability to shape their future. That if they go to the polls and they vote, or if they take certain actions today, it is actually going to have a bearing on the life that they live later on and their children's lives later on. And I've met so many people around the world that when they first encounter this industry, they completely feel helpless. They feel like there's nothing they can do anymore to actually self-determine their future. And that if you lose that bedrock of democracy, you lose democracy itself. And so a huge part of my mission is making people realize again that they in fact have an enormous amount of agency. Yes, this industry is powerful, absolutely. And this is in the long tradition of investigative journalists holding power to account, especially the types of power that undermine the very institutions that we depend on.
So tell us about the AI Resist List and where that fits in.
So the AI Resist List is this project that was produced by a group of journalists, AI researchers, and critical scholars from around the world that is centered on this idea that there are lots of different things that people are doing all around the world, in fact, to challenge this inevitability narrative. And we ultimately documented around 30 different examples from around the world of different individuals, communities, institutions taking different types of actions to push back against what we call the pillars of the empire. So the empire is upheld by funding, by narratives, by the data that they use to train their technologies on all of this labor. And so if there are different movements that are chipping away at the support, the structural integrity of these pillars, that's how the empire then begins to crumble. And so we went looking for, is there resistance happening? And then what kind of resistance? And against which of these pillars? And it turns out that there's a beautiful diversity of resistance movements all around the world. And they're, one of my favorite ones is there's this group in Quilicura, Chile, which is actually one of the communities that I cover in the book, that is experiencing a lot of extraction of its resources due to data center development. And after I published the book, they came together as a community and they thought, well, how can we raise awareness about the plight that we're dealing with? And so they created this website called Kili.ai, where when you log onto it, it looks like a chatbot. You can type into the browser, and then it gives you a response. But what's giving you a response is not an AI model. It's actually a person in that town. And so for 12 hours, they said, anyone around the world can message us, and we're going to deliver you a response, just like ChatGPT. And so if someone asked for a photo, they sent it to their local artist named Benji, and he would draw a photo on paper, snap a picture, and then send it back. And it was their way of raising awareness about the environmental impact of using AI on their community in particular, but also just communities around the world that are hosting these extractive data centers, often against their will. And it was also a way of getting people to ask this question of, do we really need to mindlessly use AI all the time for some of these frivolous things? Why aren't we just reconnecting with people in our communities, reconnecting with human expertise, and just using our social relationships to get this information?
So what's your hope of the world you'd like to see in your lifetime in terms of how we use AI, how much we use it?
My hope is that people recognize that the goal is never to just advance technology for technology's sake. Whether we're talking about AI or any other type of technology, technology should only ever be advanced in service of people and society. And so if we can hold to the North Star that ultimately what we are trying to go for is a world in which every single person deserves a dignified life and has access to that dignified life, and then we can figure out, based on that organizing principle, what kind of technologies we want, which technologies are we missing, which ones do we need to continue to advance, and so on and so forth. That is what I hope for.
But aren't most people not in control of that at all? I mean, we all live in capitalist societies in which the decisions around how our work, lives, and education are going to be structured are taken by people at the top. We don't get to say that.
This is exactly what I think is absolutely untrue and why we developed the AI resist list. So recently, OpenAI had to shutter its video generation tool, Sora, after it's announced Sora saying that it would be the second best product since ChatGPT. Why did they shutter it? There are several reasons, all of which was shaped by grassroots action. One, constraints on computing resources. They literally can't sustain it because they have other projects that they need to support and they just don't have enough data centers. In 2025, in the US alone, data center protests stalled over $100 billion of data center projects, many of which were OpenAI data centers. So that's one. Second reason.
Protests to stop building.
Yeah. Protests to stop building. Second one, they are facing a lot of financial uncertainty as a company. They're trying to prepare for IPO, and IPO means that now you're in the hands of the market. And one of the challenges that they're facing, Wall Street is beginning to get quite nervous about whether or not AI companies can meet their promises because they're seeing this broad backlash from the public. And so Wall Street is pricing in these concerns into their valuations of these companies. Third reason, OpenAI was seeing flatlining usage with the product. That's also collective consumer action. Consumers just are simply not using it because they don't want it in the world. And so absolutely everyone can play a role in shaping the future of technology development. It is not just in the hands of the elite. Of course, the elite get to just wake up and make a decision with the snap of their fingers, but everyone else that has been engaging in these protests, in these resistance movements, raising awareness, generating public backlash, have had real tangible impacts on the trajectory and strategy of these companies.
Because how they're portraying the future is, we've seeing it, this week with Musk and his, projected IPO around SpaceX, of the creation of multi-trillion-dollar companies and trillionaires at the top rather than just billionaires.
Yeah.
And they see a world in which a few people will be extraordinarily rich and will control it all. You're saying we can stop it, even though
Absolutely.
it seems to already be here.
I mean, look, in history, kings also controlled the world. I mean, if you want to talk about supreme power, we've been through cycles where single individuals had supreme power. And we then made the world move from empires as the organizing force in society to democracies. How did that happen? That was also through resistance all around the world. I mean, talk about how crazy it was at that time when people didn't even have, real examples of democracy in practice. They just had an idea of what it could look like. And that was enough for people to organize protests and engage in this collective uprising and to make the empires fall. So why wouldn't it happen again?
You talked a little bit about China putting out open source products. I mean, why are we not seeing more challenge to Silicon Valley and its dominance from China and India than we are at the moment? Or do you think it is there?
I think that there's a lot of challenge. I mean, when DeepSeek came out, this was a really big threat to OpenAI because they're trying to monetize a product that now is available for free somewhere else. And so that's part of the reason why OpenAI is also struggling. They're struggling to figure out a business plan. They're losing enormous amounts of money right now. They cannot actually sustain on their own. That is part of the reason why they have to IPO, because they've already tapped out the amount of investment that they could possibly dredge up from private investment markets. And so they have to go public to get more investment from public markets.
Oh, and why do you think it is that we haven't had a bigger debate yet about the basic question of why are we creating something that replaces human beings?
I think it's because these companies just speak with such confidence about this is the technology, it landed from the heavens and it's inevitable and you just have to deal with it. And it's taken people a while to realize that none of that is true. So we are beginning to see people question, wait a minute, if you're saying that they actually chose for it to be this way, then why are they choosing that? But before people recognize that it's a choice, it really does make you, like that narrative does make you feel like you should just lie down and let it wash over you.
And are you at all hopeful when you look at politics? You know, does politics seem to get this stuff, or is politics just bought by it?
You know, I think in the US, there's this really remarkable thing happening right now where I think AI as an issue is becoming the gateway issue to revitalize democratic participation and to create a new kind of politics in the US. The number of communities that I have seen that people are packing into city council meetings again because of data center development, for example. They want to be there to show their policymakers face to face that they do not want this facility within their community. And that is then leading them to show up to city council meetings for other types of issues because then they realize it works. They stalled the project. Now they're going to show up again for another type of issue, whether it's related to the school board or something else. So there is this wave that's happening with some of the elections we're seeing now where people are actually voting in elected officials or ousting elected officials on the basis of their track record related to AI. And we are going to have the midterms soon in the US, and we're going to see, you know, how many federal legislators get voted in or out on the basis of maybe their track record on this issue as well. And there is potentially going to be a new generation of leaders that come in during the midterms and start changing the way that democratic politics has been working.
So you're more hopeful?
I am hopeful. I'm incredibly hopeful.
Karen Hao, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your ways to change the world. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.